past, and I think we're going to have a really good one today, guys. This is going to be really interesting. It's going to be way over my head, but we're going to learn a lot. You guys are going to learn with me, okay? And this is really, it's actually a really important topic, and I think it's going to challenge us. And I think that's what we all need, probably more in our lives. And I'm joined by Mauro, a friend. I already said it wrong, but I'm going to try to get his name right. It's with a rolled R. You know, it's the Italian R. He's a friend from Italy, and we're going to talk about science or what science actually is. And I guess, Mauro, the best way to start would be to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the topic.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, for this transmission. First of all, my name is Mauro Stenico. My education is a philosophical and a historical one. I have 2 philosophical degrees in Italy, and then I have a PhD in political communication regarding the subject matter of history of science. My interest is in the history of cosmology, and especially, I would say, the multiple connections between modern cosmology, religion, Catholic religion, and the political ideologies of the 20th century, like National Socialism, communism, and that's my education. That's all.
Interesting. And so, but the cosmology and the political side, they're not
Yes.
connected. Are they? Do you connect them? Do you connect them together?
Oh, they are. They are.
Interesting.
Because, for
Okay.
example, I can say you something. Under Stalin, it was prohibited in the Soviet Union to talk about the Big Bang Theory or the beginning of the universe because it was seen as a religious theory. So, if you have to show that matter is infinite and eternal, you cannot say that the universe had a beginning, because if you say so, then there is a God, there is a prime mover, and so on. It was prohibited, and during the Great Purges in the Soviet Union, a lot of scientists did pay with life this affirmation, this proposition. Beginning, the universe had a beginning, and even under Hitler, there was a big problem in saying that the universe had a beginning. Not so much as in the Soviet Union, but anyway, there were some problems.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. So it's hard to imagine now. I think that we would be persecuted, I suppose, but I think now we see a lot of actual misinformation, right? And the actual
Yes.
misunderstanding of science. So I don't think
Yeah.
it's necessarily that good scientists are going to be killed or thrown in prison, but it's more that you just don't actually have. Do you actually have good scientists? I suppose that's the question, and I think that's where we want to start, right? So Mauro, what is science actually? I mean, and I think that's what we want to talk about, right? What is it? What do people today see it as, and what should it be? What should we understand it to be? And I think your philosophical background is going to help us hopefully fill in those the holes of what is science. So what is it, Mauro?
It's a very, very hard question, but also a fascinating one. Very, very fascinating. Well, from a traditional, I would say, Thomistic point of view, science is defined as, I say it in Latin, the cognitio certa rerum per causas. I try to translate it. So, the clear knowledge of things in virtue of their causes. I mean, I do really know something if I know its cause. I give you an example, Kevin. For example, everyone can observe the solar eclipse, but this is not a scientific knowledge. This is only the observation of effect. Anyone can see the solar eclipse. Scientific knowledge does come when you know why this natural phenomenon happens. Why is there a solar eclipse? What are its causes? So that's the scientific knowledge. So the cognitio certa rerum per causas. And this is the pre-Galilean, pre-modern definition of science, the traditional one. Even if you read the work of Aristotle and Saint Thomas of Aquin, we can see this definition. In this sense, I would say something which can sound maybe as a scandal to many people nowadays, that in this sense, even theology is a science, because starting from the so-called implicit reveal, from the so-called revelation, theology looks for the implicit revealed. So that set of truths which are implicit in the revelation, in the scripture, and which can be elucidated, which can be made explicit. So even now I give you an example. For example, we know for certain that Mary is the mother of God. And then we know for certain that Jesus is God. So we know that Mary is the mother of God. Mary is the mother of Jesus. Jesus is God, so Mary is the mother of God. And this is a rational, logical, coherent procedure, a scientific inquiry, I would say. But as you said before in your question, there is nowadays a different way to see science, because nowadays there is a very influent modern bias upon science. I mean, science, so think people today, has only to do with measurable things, with observation, with empirical data, so with matter and material entities. We cannot hear today that theology is a science, but theology is a science. Actually, keeping in mind the traditional definition of science, we can understand that science in general is something based on three premises. I propose three premises, as some philosophers of science do say. First of all, an object, an inquiry subject, which can also be non-empirical, for example, as it happened in mathematics. So science has not only to do with matter, with material entities. Second, the application of a logical reasoning, because we have to ensure the connection between premises and conclusions. So the logical reasoning. And then the third condition is the epistemological foundation. That is, how do you proceed in a given science? For example, in physics, we always have two parts: the theoretical part, theory, and then the practical one, experience. So you have to prove your theory with observation, with experiments, and so on. That's the general definition of science, seen in a traditional or Thomistic way. So science is not only material science, empirical science, or natural science, but even theology and even philosophy can be a science and is a science.
And so is that different than, so you started at the beginning, you said that that is a pre-modern version of it, and that was pre-Galilean. So
Yeah.
so are you, I guess you're going to explain exactly what, how does the post-Galilean way of thinking, I guess, I mean, what did he propose, I suppose, that changed this?
Yes. Do you want me to do it now? We can do.
You can save it for later too. If you're planning on it, then you can save it for
Okay.
later. No
Okay.
problem. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can say it later. That's a very
Sure.
important point. But first of all, maybe we need to go deeper into the philosophical foundation of science.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Okay, so here we can see an opposition between realism and idealism as a philosophical foundation of science. So within the Thomistic tradition, realism is the philosophical foundation of science, and realism is the opposite of idealism. Idealism, as you know, sees nature as a projection of a mind. So in the critique of the pure reason, Immanuel Kant, who is not really a pure idealist, but anyway, it doesn't matter now. Kant says it is impossible to know what or how things really are. So we can only know the appearances of things, how things do appear to us, the so-called phenomena. Kant calls them the phenomena, but not the essences of things. So how a thing and what a thing really is, the so-called noumena. And if you see, Kevin, we can say that this has only implications, consequences on modern ethics, because nowadays even male or female characters
Yeah.
are seen as a projection of the mind, or a way of feeling, or an emotional way, or the product of a social convention. This is a product of idealism. So if we permit idealism to enter into ethics, into science, we have these results. So we have scientists, for example, confirming male and female are not only natural data, but way of feeling, of personal feeling,
Mm,
or social convention. So that's to say that philosophy can also create science and a different way of understanding science and looking into nature. This is idealism. Then there is the realism. On the contrary, realism conceives nature as something which is objective, intelligible. That's incredible because the universe is intelligible. It's a gift, a God's gift, a gift God gave us, and it's intelligible and independent. In a certain sense, we can say that nature imposes itself to our mind. So it's not a creation of ours. Nature is something which imposes itself because it does exist. It's objective. This doesn't mean, of course, that we know all aspects, all details, all secrets of nature. But this means that we can at least have a partial objective knowledge about nature. So we can know nature. We can have a clear knowledge of nature. It's not always all. It's not all a product of our mind. Either knowledge can be really objective. So I would say no realism, no science, and even no objective ethics, because even ethics in this sense is seen, if it is based on idealism, as something changing with history, with time, with the social feelings, and so
mm.
on.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. You see it. You see it now, right? I think you had a great explanation of it with the male and female. It's really clear and I suppose rational, but I say exactly the idealism leads everything into emotions. I mean, but
Yeah,
it's so true. It's exactly
yeah,
our entire world right now seems like it's run on emotions and almost no rationality whatsoever. And I think again, I'm sure you're going to explain this, but you see it also in science. I think you see it in education. You see it in terms of truth, right? Exactly. I'm sure also in theology. Like we had Bergoglio in Rome, also saying, kind of, all paths are equal. Every
yeah.
religion goes. That's I guess also kind of it's certainly not rational. And it's an interesting thing. It all kind of goes back to a philosophical nut, I suppose, right? That grows into this big tree of nonsense.
Yeah, because there is also the non-contradiction principle in philosophy. But if you say that all religion guide us to God, you are contradicting yourself because each religion does contradict the other religion. So that cannot be true. That cannot
Exactly.
be objective. Cannot be a scientific or a really philosophical knowledge. That's the point.
But
So I
it
say,
sounds good, right? It feels good. But I just want to be
well,
nice. I want to be nice to the Buddhists and right? Exactly.
yeah,
It's not.
yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't make
yeah.
sense. It is just purely what do I feel? Yeah. So true.
Yeah, this is very dangerous because if you live in an emotional way, if you base your existence and your faith on emotions, then you have always to keep in mind that emotion can be manipulated. I can manipulate your emotion as I want, with propaganda, with television, with newspapers, and so on, with images and so on. So, if you will live not as rational beings, because today I think, Kevin, we lost reason. We have lost our reason and the capacity of reasoning, and we live as emotional animals, so to say. So we are very easy to manipulate. That's my personal conviction.
And do you think as a student of history, do you think that was that the case also, say, I don't know, before Christ or in the quote unquote dark ages? I mean, was it also this has this happened before, or are we just really the worst, generations of all time? I assume this has happened before. I guess it's fallen human nature to go away from reason and logic.
No, I think that even before Christ, philosophers and people were more intelligent than us today
Hmm.
because they did use reason. For example, looking for the proofs for the existence of God. I mean, all ancient philosophers, there were some exceptions, but did accept the idea that God exists because they look nature, they look the perfection of nature. So it was for them it was really easy to understand that the universe had a cause. Today we are not able to say it because scientists do study, for example, the DNA, the physical forces, but they are not accepting anymore the idea that physical laws and so on do come from God, because God created an intelligent creator. God is an intelligent creator who created an intelligent nature, so to say. And reading the book of nature, we can go to God. That's that was the ancient conviction, the ancient philosophical position, the mainstream of the ancient times.
Interesting. So I guess if anything, we're just kind of connected with the ancient pagans, maybe who just maybe they who
Yeah,
worship the sun, or the
because
Aztecs who murdered everyone for their hungry gods, I suppose.
and when I say that we have to use reason, I don't mean rationalism, of course, but reason is a capacity God gave us in order to orientate ourselves in word, in the truth, in looking for what's really is truth, and so on. And as Pius X says in his Pascendi Domini Secretis, the problem of modernism, you say modernism in English,
Hmm.
modernism is that it's not rational. It is totally emotional. It's a complete agnosticism. That's the problem. So it doesn't look for the truth.
Mm. It's interesting how it all connects, isn't it? I have so
Yeah.
many podcasts, and we just, I think the last 2 weeks we've talked about that exact same encyclical, about Pius X, about modernism, because it all comes together, doesn't it? So many of our issues now, maybe all of them, come together in this issue of modernism, and that's exactly what Pius X was trying to warn us about. That this is the greatest of
Yeah.
heresies and philosophies, and we see what has happened to the world. I mean, it's turned philosophy, reason, science on its head, and I guess that's where we are. And I guess again, it's good to have
Yeah.
you on to try to explain us what is science. So it's good.
Yeah. And if you want, we can go a little more
Hmm.
deeper, saying that, for example, science, natural science, cannot explain everything. Empirical science. So there are different levels of science. There are, first of all, the physical sciences, whose object is matter, material entities with their properties, movement, size, and on and so on. So we have chemistry, we have physics, we have astronomy, cosmology, and so on. Then there is another level, the so-called abstract sciences. For example, mathematics. They concern the most relevant property of matter, which is quantity. Quantity, which is the most relevant accident, as Aristotle said of physical substances. So here I mean the reference between accident and substance. And then there is, of course, metaphysics, which is very important even for us as Catholics. It's very important, metaphysics. Metaphysics is an inquiry on what transcends the material world, so the soul, God, and so on. This word metaphysics does come from the Greek, meaning going beyond physics. Meta ta physica from the Greek. It is something which goes beyond nature. Nature is physics. Metaphysics means going beyond nature. So the starting point, as St. Paul explains, for example, in his epistle to the Romans, the starting point of metaphysics is always the material world. But then, if the starting point is here, using our mind, we can go beyond. For example, from nature to God, from the beginning of the universe to the cause of this beginning, and so on. And here we have to say that there are categories of being, of reality, which cannot be the object of empirical sciences. Natural sciences, Kevin, do explain as a number of notions regarding, for example, the human body, the earth, the planets, and so on. However, for example, natural sciences cannot explain why I find a mountain landscape as beautiful. So, natural sciences can teach how a mountain did form, did originate, but not why I find it beautiful. The concept of beautiful cannot be explained in mathematical formulas. There are aspects of reality, and I think this is another gift of God. This is a very special one. There are aspects of reality which can be seized only by the intellect, so by the mind, by the intelligent creator, and not even by the animals, for example, because I cannot explain to my dog what a nice picture is, what a beautiful person is. It's impossible to explain to our animals that.
I don't know if you can explain to a modernist what natural
Oh,
beauty is. Right? I
yes,
mean, right? It's interesting. I was just did a bike ride today, and we live in a beautiful area in Bavaria. So we have beautiful homes and churches and mountains, and it's very nice. And we're about a 10-minute bike ride from Austria. So I biked into Austria, and as soon
yeah,
as you bike into Austria, they have fewer regulations, and so they don't have as nice buildings. And right on the border, this building that's just square. It's this square box, just like, and it's black, and it almost doesn't have any windows. And the first time I saw it, I remember thinking to myself, I know that is either a museum or it is a government building, right? It's the government, or it's something to do with art. And of course,
yeah,
I think it's a government. I'm not even sure what, but something from the government of Austria. And it just shows you again, it's such an example again that they. I'm kind of going off topic, I know, but it's interesting to compare this, how even though we can't explain why we find a mountain or a tree or a beautiful church beautiful, I suppose there's still some symmetry in it, right? There's something to it that we know is good or bad, and it's something that
yeah.
the modern world is actively trying to destroy. And it's another interesting part of the puzzle, I suppose.
Yeah, it's sufficient that you do look, for example, to modern churches in
Yeah. Yeah.
comparison with ancient ones, with
Exactly.
medieval ones. Terrible, terrible. We have lost the sense of beautiful. We have lost the sense of beautiful. That's terrible. That's terrible
Absolutely.
because even in the poor villages, the churches were always beautiful, even in the poor villages in the ancient times. Nowadays, not so. We are destroying ancient churches. It happened, for example, here in Trentino, in a very beautiful and ancient church. It was destroyed in order to make a new church, modern one, which is terrible. You
Mm.
can see it. It's a square, as you say, which says absolutely nothing spiritual, nothing, nothing. So you can't even pray because it's like you were in a how do you say, in a stockage, in a house, in a wardrobe, as you say.
Yeah. Like a warehouse or something, right? It's just
Yeah,
a
okay,
just a
okay.
yeah, just a
Yeah.
block building. That's
Yes, yes, of course.
crazy.
So I said what we discussed together now because I wanted to make this point. Natural sciences can and experiments cannot exhaust reality. How would you explain this as a question? For example, using mathematical formulas, the sweetness of a musical melody, or my emotion when I think to people who passed away. How can you describe using Darwinian terms, using, for example, the principle of the survival of the fittest, this personal sacrifice of the Christian martyrs of the first centuries?
Hmm.
How can you describe it in an evolutionary terminology? It's impossible. It's impossible. So I think there are two possible scientific and philosophical approaches to nature, which one can find in the context of the history of science. And I propose to call them the absolutistic one and the open one. and these are scientific and philosophical approaches to the study of nature. So the absolutistic one, which is nowadays predominant, is a complete and blinding trust in methodological materialism. So, since my senses can feel nothing except matter and material entities, and since I cannot make experiments on spiritual entities, on immaterial entities, realities, so everything which exists is matter or does come from matter. So everything or reality is material and there is nothing else. Stop. So the material world and stop. No soul, no God, no intelligence allowed. In this sense, for example, if you look to the field of the neurosciences, one has to say that the mind is the product of the brain. So no brain, no mind at all. And mind cannot be seen as something independent from the brain, from an organ, from our physical body. God is an ideal projection of the mind. I give you here two historical notes. After having received a little complaint from Napoleon because he hadn't mentioned God in a book about the universe, the French astronomer Pierre-Simon de Laplace simply answered Napoleon, "Sir, I have no need of that hypothesis. So I can explain the universe without using God." And this is the approach which is nowadays predominant. I have no need of that hypothesis. So matter is everything. The universe is self-sufficient. No God, no intelligence. I don't need them. And the very popular British cosmologist Stephen Hawking, who passed away some years ago. I think it was 2018. I think I don't remember, but that's not the point. Talking about the theory of everything, which is a theory which could explain all reality using possibly one formula, one mathematical formula, or a few formulas. He wrote in a book that the theory of everything, I'm gonna quote it. The theory of everything would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. So not only do natural sciences exhaust reality, but even God's mind. That the absolutistic approach. Of course, in Stephen Hawking, God is only a provocative reality, not a very existing one to him. That's the point. Then there is the open approach. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to comment because I think I don't follow this much, but I feel like I've seen somewhere or read somewhere that Stephen Hawking kind of continually got stranger and stranger views or
Yeah.
hypotheses, because I think he maybe by the end when he saw death, maybe he saw he actually did want a solution. And so I think he was starting to believe in what the Matrix theory and all of these other very silly things is like. And the one
Yes.
that he just seemed like he could never accept was there was a creator. It's sad, really.
Because if you don't want to admit that the universe had an absolute beginning, you have to look for alternative theories, as for example the multiverse theory,
Right.
the cyclical universe, and so on, which can be discussed, I admit, in a scientific way if you accept only them as a hypothesis, not as demonstrated theories, but not for ideological reasons. The problem is that now scientists are looking for these alternative theories, even for an ideological motivation, for ideology, because it's impossible to accept that there is something else outside the universe. That's the point. This is the absolutistic approach to nature. Then there is the so-called open one, which accepts the fact that the best explanation for nature is not necessarily or completely matter. For example, the Belgian cosmologist and Catholic priest Georges Lemaitre, who is the father of modern cosmology, said one time during an interview, talking about his career as a cosmologist and as a priest. I quote him: "There were two ways of arriving at the truth. I decided to follow them both. So we don't have a contradiction between religion, faith, and science."
Interesting. Sounds like a better option.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that it is. It's so fascinating how it all, again, it all connects, and it's all, and I guess I've always wondered, I suppose, how has science, or the how science is taught, obviously, as we're talking about how it's being taught kind of philosophically different.
Yeah.
Is that been something that, do you think that's been purposely controlled by enemies of the church, since Galileo? Or is it just something that, again, happens because men have lost their reason, and I don't know, they're blinded by the devil or the world? I mean, do you think, has it been a purposeful leading
Well,
away from this true view of science?
well, it's a little bit of everything. Surely it was purposeful, for example, in some historical cases, as it was, for example, in the Soviet Union. You have to explain cosmology, biology, and so on without referring to an extra material reality. So we have to go the strangest theories regarding the origin of life, the strangest theory possible. And even in the time of the so-called I don't know how you say in English. Enlightenment
Hmm.
should be
Hmm.
enlightenment. Okay. It of course it was full of enemies of the church. So everything could be used in order to exclude church dogmas and so on. So it has been purposeful. But then I think that in part it was only the product of a misunderstanding, and of a sort of superbi. You say, how do you say when people is very superb?
Oh, the elites, maybe, or do you mean like the people at the?
No, no,
No.
no. I mean, when you, as a man, want to see yourself as God, as a Superman.
Ah, yeah. Oh boy, you're putting me on the spot. but
No
I know
problem.
what you
No
mean.
problem.
We know what you mean. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. So, from a certain point of the history, some people wanted to see themselves as God, not
Hmm.
a man, but as a Superman. And if you want, we can discuss some minutes about it. I
Hmm.
mean, the origin of such an approach. So, as we said before, nowadays materialism is absolutely predominant in science. We consider science as something which has to be materialistic. No intelligence, no God, no immaterial entities are allowed in the explanation of nature. And I think the origins of such an approach date back to the 17th century in Europe, when the so-called Great Instrumental Revolution took place in science. With the instrumental revolution, I'm thinking to the introduction of telescope and microscope and so on. So these new instruments play a decisive role in order to have a better analysis regarding the quantitative, the numerical aspects of nature, which were before a little vague and so on. But it has also an epistemological consequence, because step by step happens so. So something was seen as objective, as scientific, only if it was measurable, if it was observable, if it was discovered through instruments. So this was the birth of the quantitative or numerical or empirical science. And in principle, this is not a problem, because if we can have a better knowledge of the quantitative aspects of nature, it's better for us, for science and so on. But the problem does come when you think that nature is only quantitative, is natural. So when you think that all science is quantitative science, empirical science, because then you cannot see, for example, theology as a science anymore, because theology is not quantitative. That's the point. So step by step, only quantitative science was seen as science.
Hmm.
Metaphysics, which had a very, very long tradition, was reduced to something bizarre, to something personal, to something strange, non-scientific. So we don't need to surprise when Kant writes, for example, keine Metaphysik mehr, no more metaphysics, no talking about God, about the soul, and so on. But Aristotle and St. Thomas show that quantity, as we said before, is only an accident of the natural entities. So we can look, for example, you mentioned Galileo, we mentioned Galileo. If we read the Saggiatore of Galileo, 1623, we read that to Galileo, nature is a book. And this is this is nothing new, because even if we read ancient Christian philosopher and theologians, as for example Saint Augustine, we find this metaphor of the nature as a book. And reading this book, we can go from here to God. It's absolutely normal. But the problem is that there was a time in which people began to think that nature was only mathematical. So Galileo says nature is a book which is written in mathematical terms,
Hmm.
and you cannot read it if you don't possess the mathematical language, the mathematical instrument. So it's not a partial lecture of nature, the mathematical one. It's all nature. So all nature is mathematical. So you cannot do metaphysics and so on. So, for example, Galileo said you cannot talk about the essences of things. We cannot know what a thing really is, as Kant, for example, like Kant. But there was also a deeper development of things. In the 17th and in the 18th centuries, the elaboration of more precise instruments for measuring time, I mean clocks, more precise clocks and so on, caused the growth of the mechanistic paradigm of nature. The universe was seen as a great machine, as a great clock, based on precise rules. Of course, the machine and the rules were created by God, by a God. We don't know what God now, by a God, but with an initial act of creation. But then, after this initial act of creation, the universe could work alone, independently. So you understand that from here to the idea of the self-sufficient universe, the passage maybe was gradual but inevitable, as it was the passage from here to scientism. So science as the solution for everything in the existence, scientism, which is a blinded faith in science, but in material sciences, for example.
Interesting. So it's interesting that okay, so scientism is so it's like the mathematical version. So you take out the metaphysics, et cetera. Okay, that's interesting. It actually makes sense. Even though it's late, this is connecting. You must be doing a good job. So please continue.
So here is, of course, here is a big philosophical mistake. One cannot affirm that since immaterial entities are not observable, for example, we cannot observe the soul. We cannot observe the soul, so they don't exist. Are justice and truth, for example, measurable? No, but they do exist, and have been the subject matter of a great discussion in the history of philosophy and theology. So I would say that metaphysical entities are not measurable. Anyway, they are knowable. They do exist. Okay, so in this sense, experiments, observation, natural and empirical sciences don't exhaust reality. That's the sense.
Interesting. Huh. Boy, yeah, good. My brain, I'm following you, but it's a lot. It's a lot, but it's so fascinating. It really is interesting to see how this is step by step happened, really. I mean, and just to see kind of how it started and where it
So,
goes. And again, how it's
yeah.
connected: science, philosophy, education, culture, politics works together.
I don't want to make here a sort of j'accuse, a sort of accusation to Galileo, because I think that things going went beyond
Hmm.
Galileo's will. But anyway, there was the basis. These were the foundation of what come later. That's another point to keep in mind. And if you want, we can use some minutes in order to explain some modern discoveries.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So if one possesses a open approach to nature, as we described it before, and one has a non-prejudicial outlook on nature and the scientific discoveries, one can honestly infer the existence of an intelligence to explain the universe, the macro universe and the micro universe. As many philosophers of science say, for example, I'm thinking to Stephen Meyer, which is a very great American philosopher of science, a very, very good one, very good. In our common experience, it is completely normal that when we have to do with an intelligent structure, for example, a software, a book, or a clock, which I find in a desert, we usually refer to intelligence in order to explain it. So you will never say, Kevin, for example, will never say that a clock on a mountain was created by the chance, but by an intelligent being. And this is a coherent, this is a logical procedure, because each effect has to be explained with an adequate or proportional cause. And this is the cause, the very important philosophical principle of the proportionality of cause. I mean, a cause must be at least as perfect as its effects. Should an effect possess more perfections than its cause, then there would be a part of the effect which we cannot explain. And this can be a miracle or magic. So, for example, if one can honestly and completely explain a material effect using material causes, then it's arbitrary to look for spiritual causes. But if the materialistic explanation is not sufficient, then I think it's prejudicial, anti-philosophical, and anti-scientific to exclude a priori every intelligent cause. Some examples. It is very hard to explain, even nowadays, the birth of life from pure non-living matter, or, for example, the birth of rational life from non-rational life, because rational life, ontologically speaking, is more perfect than non-rational life, and we should always look for the best explanation of things. And if the materialistic explanation is not the best one, then we have to exclude it and look for something else, even in science, And we can give here some examples coming from the 20th century science. For example, the universe is not eternal. We have the Big Bang Theory. Of course, we can discuss on it as we want, because there are limits, there are points which are not very good explained. I do agree. But nowadays, if you look to scientists in general, there is this acceptance of the idea that our universe is not eternal. But then there are the materialistic scientists who goes beyond and say that everything did come from the multiverse and so on. But I propose here simple reasoning, which is also known as the Kalam cosmological argument. So everything which has a beginning has a cause. The universe had a beginning. The universe has a cause. But the beginning of the universe was also the beginning of matter and energy. So we cannot explain the beginning of matter and energy using matter and energy. We
Hmm.
have to look for extra material causes. That's very important. Then the fine tuning of the universe, the four fundamental forces, the masses of the elementary particles, and other cosmic properties do possess the very precise values for permitting an order universe to exist and even the existence of intelligent life. And such values do result extremely improbable if we look at the range of possible other values which are not compatible with life, with order and life. So it's not a question. It's not a point of chance that everything went good for us, but there was a selection of this point. And even if we look, for example, at the special properties of water, we can also infer that there is an existent an intelligence in water. I don't mean water is intelligent. I am not an animist and so on, but I mean is the result, the product of an intelligent mind. Even water. For example, if you go on my channel, which is a YouTube channel, Scuola di Filosofia di Fornace, I published 3 weeks ago a long interview with the great scientist Michael Denton, and it's in English, so we can understand everything because the interview is in English.
Well, we'll attach that link, and we'll make sure you send me that link. We'll attach it
Okay,
in the show notes because no one's gonna find that channel. We'll attach
okay.
your channel in the show notes because I think everyone's like, you said that way too fast. But definitely we'll attach that in our show here.
Okay. And Michael Denton, Professor Denton, does explain in this interview the incredible, very astonishing properties of matter on the Earth, and how these properties are really the product of an intelligent mind. So there is a fitness in nature, the fitness of nature, and you can see this fitness even in the smallest part of it. And then the DNA that was an incredible discovery in the 20th century. An extraordinary container of information lies also in the smallest cell of a living being. And this container is a very sophisticated mechanism for the storage, for the elaboration, and for the transmission of information, much more complex than the most complex informatic database. And then there are the problems of the Darwinian evolution, which is today seen as a paradigm by most of the scientists, but which has problems. For example, Darwinian evolutions does affirm slow changes in the living forms, so new animal forms coming from simple and common ancestors. And there should be a number of intermediate forms throughout a very long geological period. But at the time of the so-called Cambrian explosion, which happened 441 million years ago, during a geologically very short time of 20 million years, which geologically speaking is very short, most of the phyla are the taxonomical groups of complex animal, did appear on Earth. And these phyla, these animals, these new species were very different from the previous one, which had been unicellular and so on. And it's very difficult to explain this, the beginning of these new life forms. Then it's very difficult even to find the so-called missing links. Where are the missing links between chimpanzee, man, and so on, anthropomorphic chimpanzee, and so on? And then, this is the last point I want to show. As Stephen Myers explains, there is, for example, even an engineering problem In order to obtain a new life form from a pre-existing one, for example, in order to build the first primordial living cell starting from non-living chemicals, we need an infusion of new information, so of new perfections. Where does this new information come from? That's the point.
Hmm. That is the question, and it's interesting. I think we have we're gonna have to do another show on evolution and as a theory in itself, because I've watched Stephen Meyer as well, but I have to say a lot of what he says also just goes right over my head. But it's very interesting because I think he's one of the few scientists that I've seen truly trying to explain that, yeah, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of things
And
the way I look at it is that, you know, it's a theory, so it's a theory of Darwin, and I think you have to make a lot more leaps of reason and logic. You have to really try to find these, you know, or, oh yeah, yeah, we haven't found it because of, we don't know. You have to make more leaps for that than simple creationism, or I don't know what you want to call it, but that God made, you know, Adam and Eve, they made the earth and the
Mhm.
animals, and I think that's it. To me, it's just even more logical, and I think, and from what I've heard today, I think it's also more scientific, and I think it's something that I would love to have you on again to talk more in depth about
Can
evolution,
I
because it's a very interesting theme for me.
yeah. Can I give you some names, because your channel is an English one, is an English, it's in English. So I give you some other names which I recommend. I truly
Hmm.
recommend to your public. So Stephen Meyer, you can find everything on YouTube. And then we have James Tour, which is a biochemist, and who says that we are not even close to explain the origin of life from pure non-living chemicals today. We are not even close. Maybe one day, but today we are not even close to it. Michael B., which is the who introduced the concept of irreducible complexity, for example, of the bacteria flagellum and so on. And then Michael Ignor, which is who works as a professor in the field of neurosciences, and there are other names, but I recommend these ones. Then there are other ones, of course.
Perfect. No, that's awesome, and it is good to study these things, because it's actually a topic that comes up fairly often. Even in my friend group, it's come up many times about evolution. You know, where are we from? What about, how do you convince people that God exists? And I think that it's one of the most basic points, right, in life. I mean, really, is the primary point. I mean, the God exists, right? It's the most important. And I think nowadays, as we've discussed, people don't have reason, but a lot of that is because they don't have God, right? Of course not. So if you don't have God, if you don't know God and love God and want God, why would you have reason? Because good and truth and knowledge and reason all comes from God, obviously.
Yeah.
And when the farther you go from God, the more stupid you're going to be. And that's just, I think that's simply the truth. And it's something that I think it's really great to have shows like this, because it will help. I hope people to be able to, if that happens, you can have the conversation with someone and say, okay, you know, I have a basic understanding of, you know, the beginnings of this topic. We hope again to have you on again to maybe dive in deeper,
Oh,
because
sure.
I mean, boy, in an hour, how do you cover this topic? You did an awesome job. It was a really good startup course, I suppose. And I think I would love people to ask, you know, in the comment section, what would you like Mauro to talk about? You know, if we have a show in the future, what would you like to discuss? I would love to go deeper into evolution.
Yeah.
That's really the one that I'm really fascinated by. But honestly, if you also, you know, you talked about, you know, political history of the 20th century. Wow, that's another one that, boy, I would love to talk about Stalin and Hitler. I mean, but I would love to have you back. Let's just say that. So,
I wanna to ask you
mhm.
and your public to excuse me for my bad English, because I don't have a really good pronunciation.
No, come on.
I try to do my best.
It's always one of those. I live in Germany, so I have to talk in German, and my German's
Yeah.
terrible. So it's always kind of it's funny to me when Germans or in Italian is, oh, you know, I can't, I can barely speak English, and you just did an hour about one of the hardest topics there is possible to talk about. So no, you
And
did great.
I miss Germany because I did my PhD between Trento in Italy and Frankfurt am Main. So I did,
Okay.
yes, yes.
So I
Well,
guess
it's very,
we could do a very rough German podcast at some point. Rough
oh, if
from
you
my
want.
side. I'm sure your German is much better than my German. No question about that. But no, it's been really a pleasure to have you on, Mauro. I hope again we'll be able to do it again sometime in the near future. Everyone, please let us know what you thought in the comments. Do you like it? Do you want to have him back? Also, like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. Is there anywhere that people can follow you? We're going to attach your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I suppose if anyone has questions for you, they can ask me. Do you want to? I don't know. Do you have a Facebook, Twitter, anything other than YouTube you'd like
I
to
have
share?
an email, and
Hmm.
people can send me an email, no problem, in
Hmm.
English, in German, no problems, absolutely.
Okay.
Uh, Maybe you can publish here my email
Sure.
later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I'll put that also in the show notes. I'll attach your YouTube channel as well as your email. So if anyone has questions for you, they can ask it. And obviously, understand. I'm sure you're a busy guy, but it's nice. I mean, I really enjoy getting emails from listeners. So please, if you guys want to reach out to me, I don't know why you'd reach out to me about this, but Kevin89Davis@gmail.com is my email address, and I will attach Mauro's in the show notes. Mauro, until next time. It's been a blast. I hope we do it again soon, and God bless you.
Thank you.